Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, a show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share the story of a video game-related controversy to my friends. This month, I'm coming to you from the editor's chair, as I'm fully immersed in some really cool episodes to commemorate our one-year anniversary of doing this show. So this month's episode is something a little different. What you're about to hear is the very first episode we ever recorded for Scandalous Games. In it, gamer extraordinaire John Dukes, longtime video game lover Elford Stephens, video game newbie Phil Thomas, and I discuss the history of the Health Hero series, a set of health educational games released by a company called Raya Systems from 1992 to 1995. You might know them from the infamous Captain Novolin, a Super NES game where you played a superhero with type 1 diabetes who teaches kids how to manage their condition. Now, before I start the episode, I have two shout-outs. First, special thanks to someone calling themselves Sean Paul. They're a person who shared with me a bunch of helpful articles related to the Health Hero series. You can follow them on Twitter at Hello Mr. Kearns. Also, near the end of the episode, I examined whether the Health Hero series was successful, and I want to give a big shout out to Cassidy over at Bad Game Hall of Fame, because my observations are based primarily on their research on Captain Novolin. They do historical deep dives on video games considered to be some of the worst, and their stuff is awesome. So I'm going to put a link to their work in the description for this episode. My apologies, Cassidy, for not properly citing you in the actual recording, and I hope this helps make up for it. So without further ado, here's our very first episode.
Yeah. All these people walking around just wanting to live their lives, and there's terrible snacks are raging through the park.
There are a lot of weird and interesting video game controversies, everything from panics over violence and panics over addiction to weird advertising campaigns and odd panics in video game media, and just all the weird and interesting ways that this medium of games has been processed by people and by society. And I'm hoping to shed light on some cool and strange stories. So the first one is a set of educational games from the 1990s called the Health Hero series, which were produced by a game company called Raya Systems. So in 1993 and 1994, there were a series of congressional hearings, with the initial impetus being concerns over video game violence. And as a result, the industry tried to clean up its public image and eventually created a rating system. This is why we have the ESRB now. And as part of that, a representative from the games industry, namely Howard Lincoln, who at that point was the president of Nintendo of America, met with Congress on March the 4th, 1994, and he tried to explain how the Super Nintendo was a system where kids could learn stuff. And he mentioned four games in particular. He said, quote, Captain Novolin, Bronkie the Bronchiasaurus, Rex Ronan, experimental surgeon, and the AIDS Avenger teach children about diabetes, asthma, and the dangers of smoking and AIDS, respectively.
Wait, Rex Ronan, that's the one where people yell fatality and finish him, right?
Finish him.
Rex Ronan wins experimental surgery.
Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong game. Is this based on former New York Jets head coach Rex Ryan?
That was before he became an NFL head coach. He was a ninja / experimental surgeon. But that would work out. He became a failed Jets coach.
He was much more svelte in the 90s. Did he perform surgery with like a katana?
Yeah, it sounds interesting. It makes me wonder if it's some sort of samurai game.
Yeah, I want to play that. Why are you talking so much crap about it?
That is definitely an experimental form of surgery to use a samurai sword. All right, so I thought for this test episode, we talk about these games. And whether or not they're any good, I'll let you be the judge of that. Like I said, they were part of a series called the Health Hero series. It was a set of 5 games. 4 of them came out for the Super Nintendo, and 1 was a PC game that came out between 1992 and 1995. My thought for the rest of us is we'll kind of unpack some of these games and learn about the company that made these things. Our story starts in January of 1987 with a guy named Steve Brown. Steve Brown at the time was an undergrad over at Stanford. He's majoring in physics, but he decides he wants to take a break from physics and he wants to study abroad. So he transfers to Stanford's Berlin campus. And while he's there, he's studying programming, and he ends up working with the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And he took on an internship where he developed a program to help computerize medical information, to help them keep track of their health solutions. And he ended up working with a fairly major German medical supply company called Boehringer Mannheim, which were a big medical supply company at the time. And with this kind of experience under his belt, working with a major medical supply company and also working in medical programming, he decided he was going to turn this into a business. And so in 1988, he comes back to California and he forms his own company. He calls it Raya Systems. He later described Raya as the first digital therapeutics company. And the goal of Raya is to help people improve their health behaviors. And he decides that the best way to do that in the early 1990s is to do what lots of people were doing, which is capitalize on the popularity of video games. And Raya becomes a health publisher. Like, they're not a developer specifically, but they work with development companies to make games with the goal of all of those games to have some sort of health educational objective for children. And they called them the Health Hero series. And so, like I said, I thought we would take the rest of the time and talk about some of these health games.
What's Steve Brown's background on video games? Does he enjoy video games, or is he just trying to make a business out of it?
I've only found one interview with Steve Brown, and he doesn't really talk so much about enjoying games. I think he's using games as kind of a means to an end. He wants to teach people about these health objectives and specifically focusing on kids. And what are kids into? They're really into their Nintendos these days.
I like his thoughts behind it, but he doesn't understand the process of games. I mean, it seems like he has a very basic formula for enjoying games. Like, video games, to me, there are a lot of things that capture my attention and make it fun. But for me, enjoying it, it doesn't seem that way. Exactly. That guy's got the look right there.
So I just shared in the chat a picture of Steve Brown.
Yeah, he's got an interesting idea, but he has to make it fun. It's not fun, from what I observe.
Can I just point out that he looks like he just walked off the set of American Psycho?
Yeah.
I mean, he looks straight out of the 80s. He's perfect.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's a good idea. Using games to teach is an excellent idea.
So the first game that comes out for the Health Hero series is a game called Captain Novolin. So Captain Novolin comes out in 1992, and it is a game that is designed to teach children how to manage type 1 diabetes. So if you were to make a game based on talking about diabetes, how do you think you might go about doing that?
That's an interesting question. Diabetes is a disease where the body is having trouble using sugar correctly. So the game would have to help explain that process. And then, since the goal is to help them control their diabetes, the challenge would have to be sugar building up and them needing to apply the insulin at correct points.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the scoring component is your blood sugar. And the goal of the game is to normalize your scores somehow.
So maybe something like Dr. Mario, where you have sugar coming down in an interesting way, and then you'd have to be able to calculate the amount of insulin that you need. And so the kid who has to treat his diabetes has to link the foods that he's eating to the sugar. So let's say instead of bricks, we have oranges and strawberries and breakfast cereal coming down, and they have to recognize that this amount is going to require this much insulin. They're going to insert that and then stop a buildup. That's what I'm seeing easily in my mind, like Dr. Mario. You know, if they're doing it incorrectly, the foods are building up. Once it gets too high, they lose. They haven't controlled their insulin. You can have time of day, morning, evening, nighttime, changing the amount of insulin that needs to be applied. And you can have suddenly a snack comes in, Snickers bars and peanut butter. And they have to think, oh, I'm going to use my short-acting insulin because this is a snack, versus using my long-acting insulin, which I'm going to use in the morning and the evening.
Kev, please tell me that's exactly how the game works.
I think, Alfred, all those are great points, but I think you're missing the big picture. We need a diabetic superhero because that's what Raya figured out. So Captain Novolin is a superhero who has kind of two superpowers. One is he can kind of jump okay, and the other is he has type 1 diabetes.
Can he kick well too?
No, he's not that active. He understands the importance of keeping an active lifestyle, but not to that point. In fact, the game begins with him hearing a message that's the call to action from him while he's on a treadmill. So he's trying to keep his exercise up. So here's the back of the box description of Captain Novolin. Aliens disguised as sugary foods have captured the mayor of Pineville, and it's up to Captain Novolin to rescue him. Leaping maniac donuts and dodging ice cream blobs, Captain Novolin must save Mayor Gooden while managing his diabetes with a good diet, insulin, and exercise. It's an action-packed adventure that teaches you about diabetes management. So the mayor of this town called Pineville, who also has diabetes, has been kidnapped, and the town feels like the best person to rescue them is someone who empathizes with that condition. They call on Captain Novolin. Before any actual gameplay happens, he has to actually do a blood glucose check. It doesn't show it drawing blood or anything, but it'll show a test and it'll show your blood glucose level at certain times of the day. And then, so Captain Novolin, having checked his blood glucose level, then goes on his adventure, and he goes through different locales, and he literally has to avoid snacks. The enemies are literally giant alien snacks. Picture like a giant donut, a giant bottle of soda walking around, or a giant cookie. I'm going to show you a video of some Captain Novolin gameplay so you can get a sense of what this game is like.
So while you're pulling that up, if I had diabetes and I'd been kidnapped, I don't think I would insist on a diabetic superhero. Like, I would take Superman if he was available. In that situation, I wouldn't be that choosy.
My point, like, snacks being bad just sounds awful, Kev. I mean, we all love snacks here.
I'm hoping that Reese's Pieces is okay. I don't know what that is. It looks like a taco with some broccoli on it and a Twizzler.
I think it's supposed to be an ice cream cone.
Damn, it's a rough ice cream cone.
So here's the call to action here. Because we're talking about this in a non-visual media, we have Captain Novolin getting a Bellatin, I guess, from the Novolin cave, and he's running on a treadmill, and it says, "This just in, aliens have landed on Mount way up there. They are disguised as sugary junk food and have been ordered by Blubberman, the leader, to take over the Earth."
I feel attacked.
The leader of these aliens is literally an obese person. So let's get to some gameplay. So at the beginning of each thing, Captain Novolin receives advice from his healthcare professionals who tell him about checking his blood sugar, and he checks his blood glucose level. Let's actually get into the gameplay. So here he goes.
I like the way his chest just looks proud.
Is he walking like backwards?
It looks like he's speed walking.
So some things about the way this game plays out is he literally has to avoid snacks. If he comes into contact with snacks, they will hurt him and he'll take damage. 4 hits and he's out. You also have to collect healthy snacks. Throughout the game, he might see things like a piece of toast, a glass of milk, an apple, which he has to collect a certain amount. He'll also periodically have diabetes-related questions that the player has to answer to get an extra hit in. I will point out also that Captain Novolin has no portion control. The player has to be careful about how much food he gets, because if you gather up too many healthy snacks, he will pass out and you have to start the game again.
So far, what I'm seeing here is a simple side-scrolling action game that you're limited to walking forward, backwards, and jumping. So I'm not seeing very much out of this gameplay. The learning is there. Trying to look back 30 years and think of what they were trying to teach people. Well, if they're trying to get more and more people to adopt the idea of checking their blood glucose at home, then this could be a start. But I don't see kids playing this game more than once. The good thing is that if you were sitting in a doctor's office waiting for your appointment, this might be entertaining enough for a half hour while you're sitting there waiting. But it would have to get most of its learning out there. I could see this before going in and having to learn diabetes management. I don't see this as something a child would want to take home and play multiple times because there's not much to the gameplay.
Yeah, I agree with Alfred there. I think the kids that are out reading a brochure than playing this game, to be honest.
So I have a question. Is there a Jurassic Park style option where you get to play as the sugary snacks?
Tormenting poor people.
Yeah.
All these people walking around just wanting to live their lives, and there's terrible snacks are raging through the park.
I will say this game is unintentionally doing its job, because if having diabetes is anything like this, I never want to play this game, which means I don't want these factors in my life.
What I love about this game is how literal it is. Like, for a person with diabetes, they have to manage their diets, and this person literally has to avoid snacks at all costs. The gameplay design is not well set up for that. I played a little bit of Captain Novolin, and his jumping is very awkward. He's got a weird kind of floaty aspect to his jumping. You can can also crush them Mario style if your aim is just right. But the other thing about this game is that some of it's kind of built on bullshit, where it has situations, particularly in the water sections, where you do a jump and there's no way of avoiding hitting something. And the thing with this game is you have 4 hits. If you get hit 4 times, you do lose a life. If you lose 3 lives, it's game over, and you have to start the game way back at the beginning. There are no continues in this game.
Damn, that's harsh.
It's interesting you mentioned, Elford, about that this might be fun to play in doctor's offices, like a short one-off kind of play thing. That was kind of what this game was designed for. So here's a little bit of background to this game. It was made in part by 2 major funding sources. One was Novo Nordisk, which was a Scandinavian company which manufactured Novolin, which is a brand of insulin, hence the name Captain Novolin. It was also put together through the government. This game was funded in part through a couple of grants from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The first grant was for about $49,000, and the second grant was for $500,000, with the goal of, quote, imprint essential knowledge and encourage positive attitudes and behaviors. And one of the places this game appeared was in doctor's offices and in hospitals. And there actually was a library kind of check-in system where you could check the game out and borrow it for a certain amount of time and then return it, possibly playing it for an hour and then getting utterly sick of it and having someone else try it. It was also endorsed by the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation. Phil mentioned at the beginning, particularly Rex Ronan, experimental surgeon, how it's like Mortal Kombat. It's funny you mentioned that because this game was developed by Sculptured Software. Sculptured Software was a big licensed game company in the early 1990s. They were really big into licensed games. They worked a lot with Acclaim, and they've developed games based on a lot of brands you're going to know. So, for example, they made a whole bunch of the Simpsons games for the NES, the Genesis, and the Super Nintendo. So they made Bart's Nightmare, for example. They made Virtual Bart. They developed game adaptations of Star Wars. They made Super Star Wars and Super Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back for the SNES.
Oh, nice.
And the reason I bring up Mortal Kombat, they made the home versions of Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3.
Huh.
It's some decent games.
They did games based on Looney Tunes. They made games based on World Wrestling Federation. They did sports games. They made a bunch of electronic versions of board games. So they did a version of Clue, Monopoly, and Risk. So they were not an inexperienced company making this, but this is what they came up with.
I mean, it's not like a bad looking game in terms of the games of that time. It just seems very silly in terms of the concept, which was probably, you know, to John's point earlier, not developed by people who were terribly into video games.
So what are our verdicts then on Captain Novolin?
So my verdict is it has like a good heart, you know, in terms of making a game that will help kids with diabetes and help them understand more of the conditions, but it doesn't have much of a fun factor to it. It's not fun, but it's educational. So they win.
You might be curious to know what other games came out in 1992 for the Super NES. Because, you know, if you're a discerning youth, you want to have a lot of options. And
that's actually exactly what I was thinking about.
So you want to compare Captain Novolin to other games you could be playing at the same time for the Super Nintendo. So here's a very short list of some of the games that came out in 1992 that were contemporaries of this game. Mario Paint, Super Mario Kart, Street Fighter II, The World Warrior.
Nice.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time.
Yes.
Contra 3, The Alien Wars, and one of my favorites, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh,
so
nice.
what you've just told us there, that some very, very quality games came out. Somewhere on that list, someone likes a game from that list. There's a couple games that I loved. And so what you're telling me is at the time, very quality games were coming out. And that really affects my judgment of this game. Video game development, it's a little bit tougher than other forms of art because you have to be able to captivate somebody's attention for a much longer time. Captain Novolin may have made a better cartoon, like a one-off or even a whole season.
Like Captain Planet.
Because when you sit down and watch television for a half hour to watch your cartoon show, you sacrifice a little bit of a time and a little bit of attention. But even a game like Mortal Kombat, if you really liked it, required a lot of attention. And the limitations on what you can do with your character in Captain Novolin would prevent somebody from spending much time there. And if they're not spending time there, they're not reading all that information about diabetes.
Alfred, I think you're gravitating towards this game as something viable a little more than at least I expected. Well, yes, kids should be able to learn about diabetes through this game, and I don't see why that should be a problem.
Well, I mean, I see hope. There is opportunity, but you need the same type of minds working on a game like this, like worked on Link to the Past. Is it necessary, though? I don't know.
Maybe the bigger question is, should Captain Novolin have had bigger brand synergy? I mean, the early 1990s, this is like the golden age of the toy, video game, TV show trifecta. That maybe all they needed was just a TV show, maybe a fun catchphrase or something. But why don't we go to our next game? Everyone's favorite ninja/surgeon, Rex Ronan, experimental surgeon. This came out a year later in 1993. This was also sculptured software, so it would not have been out of the realm of possibility that if crossovers were as big in Mortal Kombat then as they are now, that Rex Ronan, the experimental surgeon, could have appeared in one of those Mortal Kombat games. So this one, again, like Captain Novolin, was developed in part through government grants. It was put together from grants from the U.S. Public Health Service Agency for Healthcare Policy and Research, as well as the State of California Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. It was also supported by Airways Medical Technologies, which was a division of a company called Circadian Inc. And again, like Captain Novolin, was funded through a pair of HHS grants, one for about $50,000 to test out the concept, and then another for about $500,000 to develop the game. And here is the
$500,000 to develop the game.
Yeah, Uncle Sam gave us Captain Novolin.
Wait, do you guys want to develop a diabetes game like right now?
Yeah, I got a pitch. So we'll use aspects of Captain Novolin and use the theme like a Night Trap, but goofier.
Goofier than Night Trap. How is that possible?
It can be done.
Watch what's behind you. Snacks.
Oh, shit, snacks.
Oh, my God. Oh, that is something that Congress would have a problem with.
I mean, I would play that game.
So here's an idea, right? So the game is you're just a bystander inside of a fast food restaurant. And as the customers come up to get their milkshake and fries, you press a button to just slap their hand away from their food.
I would like that double cheeseburger. No, you don't.
Oh, and then like every now and then you start to get sleepy and you have to run and find some orange juice before you faint. You have to start the level over again.
No.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, let's do this for $500,000.
We're gonna need at least $500,000. I mean, come on, to make it that video game of that quality.
$500,000 in 1992 dollars today is about $952,000.
Crap! So close to $1 million.
So this game, including the initial prototype testing grant that they got for both Captain Novolin and for Rex Ronan, that's over $1 million. That's probably maybe about 1.2.
Damn, I gotta see this company's balance sheet for this shit.
I don't know how many copies they sold or what kind of presence they had in retailers. Like, I think that most of these games were specifically catered toward the healthcare community, like hospitals. The Juvenile Diabetes Foundation offered them for sale for years after this, actually. But why don't we talk a bit about this Rex Ronan game, another one of these HHS grant-funded games. So here's the back of the box for Rex Ronan. I've got the gameplay footage playing now. Embark on an incredible mission, but beware. Join Rex Ronan as he shrinks to perform high-tech laser surgery on Jake Westboro, who suffers from long-term tobacco use. Use Rex's laser scalpel to vaporize tar, plaque, phlegm, and precancerous cells. Stop a heart attack and remove nicotine addiction before it's too late. Defend Rex against microbots implanted to thwart his mission using the laser scalpel and martial arts moves. Follow the path of smoke and nicotine, discover the harmful effects of tobacco use, make headlines with Rex, and save Jake's life. So basically, the concept of this game is this dude, Jake Westboro, is a tobacco executive who has been peddling his death sticks for years and years and years and is now starting to suffer the long-term effects of smoking. But Rex Ronan, ninja warrior / experimental surgeon, is on the case and decides that his experimental surgery project is going to be to shrink down Fantastic Voyage style with his fancy laser that clears off all of the goo in Jake Westboro's body that has been accumulating through years of smoking. However, the tobacco industry doesn't take kindly to this and somehow injected Jake Westboro with tons of microbots that are designed specifically to thwart Rex Ronan, who I guess is trying to tell people how cigarette smoking is bad for you. Maybe I guess Jake Westboro got this as like when he got the job as like some sort of Suicide Squad type thing. But in any case, he battles these microbots. He clears off the accumulation of things like the effects of smoking in the patient's teeth, throat, lungs, tar in the teeth, leukoplakia, which are these white patches on the teeth, mouth, and throat, clearing out things in a person's throat and lungs, and ultimately battling the addiction itself filth in Westro's brain. Think Mario Sunshine, but instead of pollution, it's tobacco.
I kind of don't mind this gameplay.
I still picture Earthworm Jim doing all this.
For me, this is like a terrible form of Contra, whereas Contra
Nice.
had this impending need to continually move right because all these new things were coming at you, and this need to destroy things because it was going to increase or change your weapon and allow you to do more damage in preparation for the boss of the level. This game doesn't seem to have that. It's just a little bit boring.
I feel you on that, Alfred, on the Contra. Like, where's this plastic spread gun? That's a sweet weapon right there. I mean, just throw some spread in there. It'll be a better game, I think.
Well, Rex Ronan gets his choice of his regular laser and a slightly different colored laser.
What are the green things that he's shooting at in what looks like an artery?
It's going to the bronchial tubes. I'm guessing it's tar.
I think they specify in the manual. I just didn't pay attention. I've tried all of these games with one exception, which I'll talk about. I tried this. It is tedious. And like, yeah, you're just going around and there's the accumulations that are on the parts of the body and you just shoot at them. It's not clear how much of it you have to clear off. So if you have a person with OCD tendencies and you want to try to clear every little thing off, it can get really maddening. It's also an assault on the ears. The sound of the gun. Imagine the sound of like a digitized jackhammer.
Oh.
Goes constantly.
One of the other guys mentioned early on if the creator that we were shown actually liked video games.
You don't like video games. Look at that guy.
I'm starting to appreciate that question because it's hard to make a good video game if you yourself have no idea.
I will say to Steve Brown's credit, he outsourced the development of these games to other companies. Like he found some game companies that were fairly well established. Like I said, Sculpture Software had done games before. I don't know what kind of notes he gave them and how much direction they gave these guys and how much they had a specific vision for this.
The higher level point is that these could be super fun games to play and still people wouldn't buy them because they're games about treating your diabetes and curing your body of all the maladies of smoking.
It is a hard sell.
Yeah, it sounds like to me it's like a therapy game too. Like when you're bringing up these topics of how to take care of yourself with diabetes, you have no interest in doing it, you have no idea how to do it, and you play this game. And if I were someone just starting off learning about my diabetes, playing this game, I would feel awful. Like first thing that comes to mind is I have to hate on snacks. You know, we all love snacks.
Love snacks.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
you can't just like damn the snacks. It just seems too punishing.
I think if the guys that made Contra, and
Yes.
forgive me if the guys that made Contra made this Rex Ronan game,
They
had
did not.
made Contra in a way that you were fighting, it could be the same monsters, but you were just going through different parts of the body. People may have learned just a little bit, having been there. You know, if they had to like stand on the heart while it's beating while they're fighting a monster, they may have learned that the heart beats along the way.
Yeah.
You know,
great idea. Alfred. From the people who brought you Contra comes cholesterol, healthy LDL, and its never-ending battle against the devious HDL.
We've just cracked it.
Or maybe an alien body with all these bad things going in the body, you know?
can make things more interesting.
Make it a lot more interesting. Yep. You'll still,
Yeah.
They'll still learn. Get an
This
idea at
alien
least.
is in renal failure. you know?
Right. There you go.
So here's the sound that this game makes.
Oh man, that's great music.
Now imagine this sound and that music for the entire duration of your play. That's all you're hearing. So yeah, that's Rex Ronan Experimental Surgeon. I also will point out that you can answer true-false questions about the long-term effects of tobacco use. And I think if you get them right, it blows up some of the microbots. And if you get it wrong, then it doesn't. Its interface is weird. It will present a true-false question, and then you get like a circle that you have to blast whether or not it's true or false. I could never figure out how this interface was supposed to work. So it's hard to tell how you learn things throughout the course of this game. But just like I did with Captain Novolin, why don't we talk about some games that came out at the same time as this game did? These are some Super Nintendo games that came out in 1993. Star Fox,
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Super Mario All-Stars,
Oh yeah.
Secret of Mana.
Yes, please.
Oh fuck yes. That
That's
game is
what's on
so
my top 10
good.
list.
Yeah, definitely.
I've started Secret of Mana half a dozen times and never gotten very far. I need to
Really?
sit and play.
Oh, it's so worth
Are
it.
you playing by yourself, though?
Yeah, that's the problem.
The amazing thing was having a 3-player game like that to play with your friends. I don't know what it would have been like playing by myself, but even today we don't have many people making games like that you can play with multiple people.
Wow. So I don't know what that game is, but what I got from that was that this game was competing against a game that 30 years later, people still want to play.
So here's some other ones. Mega Man X.
Oh my God. Mega Man X. Fuck yeah. That game is so good.
Still my favorite Mega Man game.
Yeah, agreed.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
I had that game. I was just talking to a friend. I didn't realize I had given it to him.
Aladdin.
Never played it.
That's a good game. One of my favorite games that came from a movie. That was a fun game.
The Genesis one I think was better because you could use a sword.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
And the last one I have on this list, Illusion of Gaia.
So Illusion of Gaia, I have mixed feelings with. A friend of mine, we played through Illusion of Gaia. He loved it. I think it was made by Enix, I believe. And
I believe so.
Before they merged with Squaresoft. I never got into it. I think back in college or medical school, I actually downloaded it and replayed it with an emulator, and I enjoyed it more. But I know it's one of the top RPGs, but at the time, I just never felt the same magic.
My only problem with that game is I wish you spent more time blasting down a bronchial tube trying to get rid of excess phlegm production.
All right, I'll bring up our next foray into the Health Hero series because here's a fun thing about Riot Systems. They felt that while the world now had one diabetes-themed Super Nintendo game, they felt that that was not enough. There needed to be at least one more diabetes-themed game. And thus they developed a game called Packy and Marlon, which came out in 1994. I'm going to bring up some gameplay footage of it so you can see it. So this game, when it was initially in development, the first mention I have of Packy and Marlon was from a 1993 Nintendo Power article, which covered Riot Systems. And it mentioned this game having the tentative title of Camp Diabetes. And it eventually...
somebody spoke up about that. They're like... excuse me, I think it might be a good idea to change the name.
They put a huge banner on the walls. Okay, we're starting at this point, Camp Diabetes. So yeah, it eventually became Packy and Marlon. This was not developed by Sculptured Software. This instead was developed by a company called WaveQuest. WaveQuest was a very, very, very short-lived company. In fact, it only has 3 games to its credit. Packy and Marlon was the first. We're going to talk about the second in a minute. And the third one was a PC game from 1998 called Terra Victus, which the only thing that's particularly noteworthy about Terra Victus is that it was published by Ripcord Games, which published the first Postal game.
Oh boy.
Packy and Marlon was another diabetes-themed game. This time it was a 2-player game, so you could bring in a friend for this diabetes-themed adventure. And this one was endorsed by Boehringer Mannheim Diagnostics. That was the company that Steve Brown initially got into when he started working in health solutions programming in the late 1980s. And at the time, Boehringer Mannheim was making a device called the AccuCheck Advantage, which was a device for monitoring a person's blood glucose levels. And in fact, it appears in the game. Here's our back of the box description of Packy and Marlon. Super action at Diabetes Summer Camp. Oh no! Packy and Marlon, 2 pachyderm pals with diabetes, are in heavy trouble. Summer Camp has been raided by rats. The pesky critters have stolen food and critical diabetes supplies. Can Packy and Marlon find the food and supplies? To do it, they have to blast vicious varmints with peanuts and water. They have to remember to eat healthy stuff, check blood glucose levels, and take insulin. It's super learning about diabetes, and it's super fun. So the gameplay you see here, Packy Marlon is a platformer, not unlike Captain Novolin, where you play as one of 2 elephants, Packy and or Marlon, and they go around a particular level. They can jump and flap their ears Dumbo style to gain a hover. They can also shoot water and peanuts from their trunks, and they basically just try to just wreck all these rats that are on this screen while collecting healthy snacks. And this game is at least more forgiving than Captain Novolin in that you can actually recover health, but it still has this whole situation where you have to collect healthy snacks, but if you don't collect enough, or if you collect too many, and it's not really clear when you have either of those conditions, you can finish the stage and it will just tell you you'll lose. and you have to redo the whole thing again and try not to eat so much or eat not enough this time around.
So what we're seeing here is very different than Captain Novolin. This is a much more fleshed out platformer with a lot more to do. At the same time, just watching it, other than that one question it asked, I wouldn't even know it had anything to do with diabetes. I could see a kid playing this game, though.
When you said it's not clear it has anything to do with diabetes, are you saying that as a compliment?
Just objectively. So if it didn't ask that question about, I think it was MPH insulin in an open bottle, and the answer I believe was supposed to be cloudy and they clicked clear. Outside of that, I would have no idea this has anything to do with insulin. So the elephant is walking around and he's shooting some sort of projectile from his trunk. These little mice look like maybe they've got robber masks on, and you can jump on them like Mario Brothers. You can climb ladders. You can even climb the spider webs. You have enemies that move. It looks like maybe that wall can be broken. You have enemies that are dropping projectiles from above. So there's just a lot more going on here, but what I don't see is diabetes education.
Yeah, I see it as, again, this is back to my last comment. I'd rather read the brochure than to play this game. I hate to say it like that, but it's more helpful and straight to the point.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. Hey, Kev, where's the diabetes education?
So yeah, I think you make a good point. The way it covers its message is in these periodic quiz questions about diabetes, and then in the little interludes in between the games where they're having their diabetes monitor and they're showing the AccuCheck Advantage, TM, by our AccuCheck Advantage blood glucose monitor. But what's interesting is this game in particular was actually part of a couple of educational studies. For example, in 1996, there was a study on video games' role in informing children about juvenile diabetes that was eventually published in the 1997 edition of Medical Informatics. And in this study, there were two groups of children, and they were age 8 to 16, who all had type 1 diabetes, who were from two separate California clinics. I believe they were affiliated with Stanford, if I remember correctly, which would have made sense, Steve Brown being a Stanford alum at that point. Check out this deal. Each of them received a Super Nintendo with a copy of either Packy and Marlon or an unidentified quote-unquote entertainment video game containing no diabetes-related content. They took an initial survey, the kids, followed by additional surveys at the 3 and the 6 month interval that measured what they thought about managing their diabetes. I believe they gave them like small quiz questions or something about it. And the study indicated that there were improvements in child self-efficacy, more effective communication about their condition to their parents, greater self-care regarding their condition, and a decrease in urgent care visits to the doctor among the kids who played Packy and Marlon versus the control group. I really, really want to know what game they played.
Yeah, I do too. I'm also interested to know more about the kids before they played this game. I mean, were they all already aware? Are they more comfortable talking about it since playing this game?
Tell us more about the results of the study.
Sure. So the authors of the study concluded, quote, well-designed educational video games can be effective interventions for children with type 1 diabetes. But it was one of those studies where it recommended future study on children with less optimal access to healthcare. So it's all promise in this. And they did other studies like this too. I believe there was one involving Captain Novolin as well. And the fact that that study exists makes sense. I feel like that's something that applying for a government grant, they would have wanted to have some measurable results too. So it sounds like there was at least promise. And at the very least, you've got a group of kids who got access to a free Super Nintendo.
Watching this game, I see Mega Man with Mega Man never ran through somebody's house, but I think you have gameplay here that could keep somebody entertained. I could see a kid playing this game, but what I don't see in the game is a reward for actually answering questions correctly and learning. So the questions are given to you, and whether you get them wrong or right, I don't see any reward for that. So one could just skip past the questions and keep playing for the gameplay.
I'm glad you brought that, Elford, because the next game we're going to talk about does reward people for getting correct answers. And by reward, it punishes them if they get them wrong. But before we jump into that, let's talk about what are some Super NES games that came out during this game's release in 1994. Some of these may be some people's favorite games of all time. In 1994, some Super Nintendo games you had to choose from, in addition to Packy and Marlon, Donkey Kong Country.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
Mega Man X2.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
Killer Instinct.
Oh, nice.
Final Fantasy VI.
Oh, dude.
That's what I was waiting for you to say. I was wondering if Final Fantasy VI came out.
FF6.
Oh my god, yeah. That's so good.
Man.
I played the hell out of that game. Oh my
personal
god.
favorite Final Fantasy game, and one of my favorite games was Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
I saved the best for last for this year. Super Metroid.
Super
Metroid.
What an awesome game. Packy and Marlon made some steps compared to the previous two, but it seems to be 3-4 years behind the type of game that it is. Because Packy and Marlon is competing with Super Metroid.
Yeah. I mean, the kids were like, Packy and who?
Donkey Kong Country. I remember playing that all through the night.
Again, these games have a potential and have an education base, but they're competing against games that are legendary, So it seems like to me that how are they going to get their message across during that time when kids are mesmerized by Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, Mega Man X2? Jesus Christ. That's enough for me. Good God.
That's a lot to compete against. So let's jump to our next game. In 1995, the N64 is a year away at this point, and Raya Systems develops a game called Bronkie the Bronchiasaurus. This game did not involve teaching about diabetes or the effects of cigarette smoking. This was a game about managing asthma, including how to take an inhaler and avoiding asthma triggers. This game was another platformer. This was the other game that Wavecrest developed after Packy and Marlon. You could play as one of two dinosaurs named Bronchi and Trachea, cleverly named after the bronchial tubes or the trachea, respectively. And you go through this bedrock Flintstones style town, literally avoiding asthma triggers like cigarette smoke and navigating your way to the right hand side of the screen, destroying enemies with like a little stick of some kind or puffs of air, all the while collecting lungs to increase your lung capacity because that's the way asthma works, and then answering questions related to asthma. This is what I was mentioning before, Elford. In this one, you cannot progress if you don't answer a question correctly. And so you get prompts to answer a question. If the player gets it wrong, they have to literally go find a character who will tell them the answer. And then they have to find their way all the way back to that question prompt again so that they can progress. Like the other games, this one received funding from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for the first phase of this. So that's the prototyping and testing with school groups. The first grant was for $73,891. The second, for the actual development and implementation and bringing this game to market, was just shy of $750,000. So this game was just shy of $900,000 in $1995. But along the way, it received an endorsement for the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm actually not sure if this had another corporate tie-in like the other games did, but that's our game for battling asthma. In the interludes between this game, it shows you how to use an inhaler, how to use a spacer. So kind of the same concept as the other games, except instead of diabetes, now it's asthma.
So I did have asthma growing up, and it feels like the color of the green of the main character and the purple of the modals and some of the enemies are on brand because I've used inhalers and spacers that have that green and that purple and that gray.
That's interesting because obviously you're suggesting that maybe that's intentional, and I imagine it would be at the figures that these people were charging to create this product. This was a time when drug companies were spending lots and lots of money, which they still are, for advertisement, and I imagine that the heads of those companies were looking at this as advertisement.
That's something I hadn't even considered, the fact that they're creating the sort of brand synergy with their products, which I guess makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So sadly, the way they're applying these questions, I believe would make the game less fun, because what you want is you want the kids to look forward to the questions, right? Because the questions are probably the only part of the game that really doesn't have to be there for it to be a video game. So you want them to look forward to the questions. So if I get the question right, I get something that I don't need to win, but maybe I get a double jump, or I get, whatever that is he's spitting out of his mouth becomes a fireball blast. I look forward to the questions. And if the same question might be asked in a different way, it could show that he's learned something. And if the questions can be avoided, and maybe some questions have to be sought out so you can get the power up, then kids would track these questions down and learn them the same way they learn the rest of the game.
I like that idea. Yeah.
I think the last game may have been a little bit better of a game than this one, but either of them, I could see a kid playing if they were given it for free and they didn't have very many other options, such as if you gave them the console and the game for free, they might play it. And if you told the parents, don't buy them any other games for 6 months, I'm serious, they might play it and they might learn a little something along the way.
But I'll tell you one thing, once they get that new game, like Mega Man X2, that's it. That's a wrap. They'll be all about that game. This is like the antecedents for Mega Man X2, to be honest. You blast things, you keep going, there's some obstacles.
I have played this game too. The level design's horrendous.
Yeah.
It's so much traipsing around. There's no real vision in terms of the level design. So, like, you have to wander, jump around random platforms, go up and down these pipes, and God help you if you get a question wrong. We have to wander all the way back and get the right answer, then come all the way back. Yeah, this game is a pain. Do we want to hear what games came out in 1995 that this was competing with?
Let's hear it.
Here we go.
I'm excited.
You mentioned Mega Man X. Mega Man X3 came out the same year. Breath of Fire 2.
Oh, nice. That's a good one. Yeah.
Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest.
Yep.
Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. Chrono Trigger.
Oh, dude, Chrono Trigger.
Arguably the greatest RPG of all time.
That's such a good game.
And one of my personal favorites, Earthbound.
Earthbound.
I haven't played Earthbound. I would like to at some
You
point.
should, it's good.
So Earthbound was a game that the same buddy I had, he had it. But a lot of the games I played growing up, I played with my friends. I'd just go over to their house every day and play the game. But he broke it, so I never got to play it. He was telling me how good it was, but he broke the cartridge.
Oh, no.
And so when I was in college doing the emulators, I downloaded and played through Earthbound, and the game's great. It is really sad when you compare a game like this to, you know, I've got kids, and some of the games you have mentioned, I look forward to playing with them eventually, even though they were made at the same time as this game. Whereas this game, I don't even like watching it because I'm like, this is really pointless. What is he doing? But I have a question about it, and simply, when they finished making this game, what did they do with the other $950,000 they had left?
You gotta check their balance sheet for that one, man.
Graphically, this I think is the best, but I'm not a big fan of the art style.
Well, very samey too. It's kind of recycling the same assets over and over again. And again, the level design is horrendous in this game. All right, those are the games that were officially released for the Super Nintendo. The last game we're going to talk in detail about this was a PC game. And this one, unfortunately, I don't have any gameplay footage of because it's not clear if this game still exists. This was a game that came out in the middle of 1993. So it's possibly this came out sometime around when Rex Ronan Experimental Surgeon came out, and definitely after Captain Novolin. I'm going to show an image to you all. This is the AIDS Avenger. And this game was designed to promote HIV and AIDS awareness and to tackle misconceptions about the disease. The earliest mentions of this game come from 1993. I've come across a report to the Patent and Trademark Office from December the 27th, 1993, that Riot submitted for the name the AIDS Avenger. And the image that came with the trademark was one of a person whose face resembled Judge Dredd. I feel like the people who made the comic and movie of Judge Dredd would have had a case against these guys because it basically looks like Judge Dredd. This game apparently came out in April of 1993. I have a report from an article in Nation's Business from November 1993 that confirmed a release date, although that's the only evidence I've seen that this game came out. It was distributed by a company called PCSL, which was a software publisher based in Nashville, Tennessee. And I don't know who developed this game. I don't have a sense of what the development company was. And the most that we know about it is in this particular article, which shows screenshots from the game. Unlike the other games we've seen, this one clearly wasn't a platformer. It was a point and click adventure where you played as this character called the AIDS Avenger, who apparently would walk around to different locales. There's an urban neighborhood, a school. In fact, there's a couple of images of schools. And apparently the way the gameplay is you would overhear someone say some myth about HIV or AIDS. And then you were prompted with a true false prompt, and you had to answer the correct answer. And apparently by answering the correct answer, you attracted something called a goblin of ignorance, which you then had to use your gun and shoot. So that was the gameplay.
So I see at the bottom right that the game cost $39.95 when it came out. I'm just trying to picture the conversation that a kid has with one of their parents. And they're like, hey, can we buy this game? It's $40. $40. What is it? It's a game about tackling AIDS. Like, one parent in the 90s is just like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
It feels like a Rick and Morty episode, to be honest.
So for the longest time, I thought this game just never came out. I mean, this one's a tough one to market, significantly tougher even than marketing a game about diabetes or a game about asthma. A game about HIV and AIDS, well-intentioned now, is a hard sell in 1993.
Yeah.
This is a time when the misconceptions about HIV are rampant, to the point where the CDC eventually has to put out promotional campaigns about, like, you can't get AIDS from shaking hands, you can't get AIDS from sitting on a toilet seat. And the fact that the US government wouldn't even talk about AIDS. In fact, there's a very, very chilling documentary called When AIDS Was Funny, which is a series of audio clips of Reagan's press secretary responding to questions about the growing AIDS epidemic from a member of the press. And basically it's joking, it's like, what, do you have it, kind of thing? Like, it's really showing this really flippant response compared to the amount of people who are dying. So there's that. And in fact, from that article I mentioned from Nation's Business, Claude Miller, who's the president of PCSL, said that the game's subject matter made it very difficult to convince stores to carry it. According to his reports, they managed to get it in several schools. Yerba Buena High School in San Jose, California, allegedly had copies of it. And a Seattle-based organization called the Northwest AIDS Foundation also apparently had copies of it. And apparently there were talks to distribute this through the public school system. Although, knowing the people who were involved in school boards, I can imagine that would have been tough sledding to get that in schools.
You know, Kev, I don't know where to start with this game. There's so much going on with it.
The other thing I'll add is that probably the reason why this game came out for the PC, which makes Howard Lincoln's comments at the outset fairly interesting, is that chances are the reason it came out for the PC is that Nintendo probably would never publish this game. Nintendo had notoriously strict content guidelines throughout the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah.
Some of the screenshots showed that the game had a glossary, which had relevant terms like blood transfusion, French kissing, hemophilia, immune system, intravenous drugs, condoms, which are important in reducing the spread of HIV. But I feel like, education or not, Nintendo probably wouldn't have budged on that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a time when they're saying, Night Trap has no place on a Nintendo system. If Night Trap couldn't do it, I feel like there wasn't a lot of chance for the AIDS Avenger.
True. Yeah.
The other thing about this game that I find interesting is that we mentioned when we talked about Diabetes Camp, when we talked about Packy and Marlon, that someone put the kibosh on that name early on. I feel like they should have done that with this game too, because the term AIDS Avenger has a very different connotation than what they're talking about. At the time, an AIDS Avenger was a news media trope that described people who were HIV positive who deliberately infected people.
Yikes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's no evidence that this ever really happened. One of the earliest instances of this kind of trope was in 1991, in which a woman wrote a letter to Ebony magazine claiming that she was deliberately infecting people, though later the claims are proven to be a hoax. There was also a case of a guy named Alberto Gonzalez, who was an Oregon man who was convicted of attempted murder in 1992 for allegedly deliberately infecting a 17-year-old girl with HIV. And there were urban myths throughout the 90s about this idea, either people having sex with someone unknowingly who had HIV, or someone injecting HIV-infected blood into somebody. But knowing all of that, I feel like they maybe should have given that title another go.
Yeah.
What is he avenging?
Yeah, I like to know more about the game developer's stance on requiring adult supervision while playing this game. I mean, what kind of discussion are they trying to do between the parent and the kid during playing this game?
That is a good question. I do know that when the game came out, again, if it came out at all, this is at least in the materials I've seen written about this game, that there were adult content restrictions in the game, that there were certain levels that were apparently aimed at a younger audience. You could only access levels that were geared at a sort of more mature audience with a special code. So they kind of put in like an internal parental control. I don't know how that would have worked. My experience with PC games would have been maybe there would have been a code printed in the manual. There was also a not uncommon way of copy protecting games.
Yeah.
So my question with this game, as with the other games, is how much did they get paid to make it? And how many copies of the game did they sell?
Those are excellent questions. I don't have any grant information for this game like I do for the other ones. And I have no idea how many it sold because there's no clear sense of how many were distributed. And actually, I went to the source on this one. I found Steve Brown on LinkedIn a couple of months ago. And I sent him a message. I said, what can you tell me about this game? And he told me, he said, yes, the game exists, but he didn't know anything about what its distribution was like. So the only thing you can tell me is that this game does exist in some shape or form. Although this very well could be like one of those dead media, like it just doesn't exist anymore. So how many it sold, I have no clue how many games this sold.
Probably 5 copies.
It might have been just a handful of copies they gave to these schools.
Yeah, I don't think this was a way to build any revenue, honestly. I guess that the origin is more just a grant-based deal.
In terms of the company or in terms of this game?
In terms of this game.
I've got to imagine it's I bet there's some kind of grant information on here that I just haven't found yet. But yeah, so that's the AIDS Avenger. I have one last honorable mention. There was also a game about safety that they were developing that never got past the grant writing and mention in the news phase. They had a game called Splat the Safety Cat.
Splat the Safety Cat. I like it.
Dude.
So there's a December 1993 write-up on Rise Systems and Nintendo Power in which they mention Captain Novolin and they mention Rex Ronan and they even mention the AIDS Avenger. But they also mention this game called Splat the Safety Cat, which was apparently designed to teach kids about safety. And I did find a grant application for this one for 1992. They filed a grant for $50,000 to develop a prototype video game that, quote, will display common hazards in game worlds that represent traffic, bicycle, and pedestrian situations. So it's like a road bike safety kind of game. But apparently it didn't get any further than a name and possibly this early grant application. Maybe they did a prototype and they didn't like how it turned out. And I also have vague hintings of a leukemia-themed game, but it sounds like that didn't go any further than this Nintendo Power writer saying, you know, this one kid at a camp who got to play Captain Novolin said that maybe a leukemia game would be a good idea, but that's all I got for that one. So one thing I want to circle back to wrap up on is these games kind of fell under the radar. It's all about the early 2000s when you're getting sort of the rise of the internet gamer culture. You're seeing like listicles and write-ups. During that time, Captain Novolin got rediscovered and a bunch of people writing up how it was either like one of the weirdest games or even one of the worst. And one of the earliest write-ups about this was by a guy called Sean Baby. And he put Captain Novolin as one of the 20 worst games of all time. He described the game as, quote, put together not to educate children about diabetes, but to blatantly taunt their disease.
Yeah, I agree.
But I have a different question for you all. So we've had a good laugh at the expense of write-up. Do we think these things were a failure?
I don't think it's a complete failure, Kev. I mean, games are meant to get revenue and so forth, but I kind of see the heart of where they're driving with these games. But it's just a matter of marketing that they all just fell pretty flat. And especially the market is just saturated with good games too. So it's kind of hard to see a place for these games for the value that they're trying to give to kids. But they had the good intention to find a way in there in some way.
So I would say, yes, I think these games were a failure. From the information I know about them, the fact that I had no idea they existed, and the fact that there's no industry now. If these games had been more successful, I would imagine a whole genre of video game would be in existence today, but I'm unaware of one.
So I'm with Elford in that I don't see how you could classify these things as anything but failures by any conceivable definition on any level. Popularity, influence, sales. I mean, what are our takeaways from these games? Like, number one, video games are bad ways to educate children about things. First of all, just flat out, irrespective of the subject matter. And number two, the thing that I think is really weird or instructive about these games is that they talk about drug use in the way parents suspect drug use is talked about in popular games. Like, some of these games are clearly being branded and pushed by pharmaceutical companies to habituate or encourage kids to use and be accustomed to drugs. In this case, pharmaceutical drugs, right? So in that way, they're insidious because the type of people who conceive of that game are the types of people who conceive of, well, I'm sure Leisure Shoot Larry is about, I don't know, the joys of shooting up with heroin. Like, that's not what those games do. And so because you think that's how games work, that they're basically propaganda and proselytizing, that's what forces you to come up with a game like this, which fails because, one, games don't work like that.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Phil. But, you know, every game industry had its humbling beginnings. And I think this one had its fair beginnings, but, you know, it didn't go anywhere. It just, like, fell flat to its face. You know, Mario and Donkey Kong, those are really good games, even right now. But this industry tried to have something like that. But the origin, the beginning part just didn't work. Didn't make any sense.
I think about the fact that if the four of us wanted to make a video game right now, we would have a very difficult time raising $1 million to get paid to make that game. And I wonder if part of the reason these games failed is because of the way that they were funded. Because You didn't have somebody with this amazing talent at video games coupled with a bunch of people with a passion and understanding to make video games who had to sacrifice. These people got a lot of money to do this. And I kind of wonder, could we have had a genre of educational games that were worth playing if the government had said no, and people would have had to go to the streets and say, hey, I really have a great idea. I'm going to make this happen regardless, and had to do it on their own.
I've got a galaxy brain thinking kind of theory to offer. I think there is a level on which Raya accomplished what they set out to do through the Health Hero series. If we think about it as a game publisher, then yeah, they're making games that are not necessarily considered terribly fun. They're competing with a lot of significantly bigger games, and they're already having that challenge of, we're developing these things to teach somebody something, which is, as someone who works as a teacher, is always very hard to try to make learning fun through games. Either educational games are really educational or they're really fun. And oftentimes you sacrifice one in service of the other. But here's where I think Raya might have succeeded. If we think of them instead as a company that's trying to create connections in the pharmaceutical industry. So hear me out on this one. First off, we have a company that has a proven track record of working with several large companies in the pharmaceutical and medical supply industries. We've got Noto Norvis, we've got Boehringer Mannheim Diagnostics, and we also have a company with a significant history of successful grant writing, which is someone who works in nonprofit. That is hard to do. And usually the easiest way to get grant money is to already have gotten grant money. So we have a company that over the course between 1992 and 1995 is building all of these connections. And on top of that, building these connections with, say, hospitals, public health advocacy groups, it's building a network. And the reason I bring all that stuff up is because, would anybody like to guess when Raya goes out of business?
1997.
98.
Yeah, late 90s sometime.
2015.
What?
Did they make more games?
So here's the story of Raya post Health Hero series. This is why I think maybe they got what they wanted out of it, because beginning in 1997 and 1998, the company starts rebranding itself, and they're going to begin marketing electronic equipment to the health industry. They had developed a flagship product in the late 1990s called the Health Buddy, which was like this portable health monitor thing. And the idea was you would enter vitals into it and it would provide health advice. And when they start marketing this product, they changed their name in February of 1998 from Raya Systems to the Health Hero Network, Inc. So it's clear they felt like they got something out of this and some success, and maybe even thought they built up a brand recognition with these companies in this callback to their old series. And so they start marketing this Health Buddy thing. They got FDA approval for it in 2005. Here's how Business Wire described it in a 2005 article. Quote, "The new Health Buddy appliance has an easy-to-use design to help patients with chronic conditions monitor their health, receive daily coaching and education about their conditions, and educate in two-way communication with their healthcare providers, all from home." Now, I don't know if it could do any of that stuff, just to say. That's very ambitious for 2005. The enhanced Health Buddy appliance design include ports to connect multiple medical devices, as well as a large high-resolution color screen, a powerful microprocessor, and larger buttons for enhanced usability. And in 2008, on December the 22nd, 2008, they got bought up by Bosch, which is a big appliance company. Bosch was looking to get more into the health appliance industry. So they buy up Health Hero Network, formerly Raya Systems, and then in 2009, they renamed it to Robert Bosch Healthcare. They had two branches. One was in Utica, New York, and one was in Palo Alto. That was the one that used to be Raya. And then they decided to get out of that business. And so in June of 2015, they closed up the branch and they discontinued the Health Buddy. So it's possible that might have been the objective the whole time. And if we track Steve Brown back to the start of his career, how he's making those connections in the health and pharmaceutical industry, and he's focusing a lot on tech for health monitoring, that it's possible he used this foray of game development for a couple of years as a way to build those connections and get all that grant money and proven experience and working with these people. So that might be one way we can think of as Raya as a success. In any case, for Steve Brown, he got out of the company in 2008, right before Bosch bought them out. According to his LinkedIn, he said he worked as an inventor for a little bit and developed some kind of tech and had patents on things that he was working with Health Hero Network. But what's really interesting about him is he's still around. He changed career paths and went in a completely different direction. He went from medical software and supplies and medical games. He did venture capital, and then he got into the entertainment industry. And now he focuses on producing and directing documentary films. His first was in 2013. He directed a documentary about Burning Man called Spark, a Burning Man story.
Nice.
In 2019, he did a documentary called Chasing Einstein, which is apparently about Einstein's theory of relativity. And his most recent was in 2020 called Dreams at Sea. It's apparently a documentary about about Syrian refugees. So quite a journey for him, from a trip in Germany to health programming to Captain Novolin to documentary films.
All right, Steve, keep getting those checks.
I was like a man who is independently wealthy, invested that $900,000 well.
USA.
Sadly, I don't think we got very much out of the deal.
No.
I think we could have had something. I remember when I was in ninth grade, which would have been somewhere around that time, the school had us take a typing class, and we used a computer program to do it. You had to press the right key, and something would shoot up at something that was coming down. I didn't get into it too much, but that was at least something that could help you learn something. I'm not sure kids would have learned very much from these games.
My money is on the diabetes night trap game. That would be fun. Like, with goofy overtones. Like, oh shit, snacks. It should have got me.
A cookie sneaking up behind you. You got to hit the trap in time.
Oh no, it's a cookie. Fuck.
My hand is shaking. What type of coma am I going to go in? Did I use too much insulin? Did I not use enough insulin? Oh my God. Boy, Jason, you have to pick now. You're about to pass out.
Oh no, Mr. Insulin's here. Oh.
Save me, Captain Novolin.
I do believe that games can be used for learning. I just don't believe people have put the same amount of effort into those games that we mentioned, like Minecraft before. Those games actually are very creative. They took teams of people that, again, sat down and used all their free time to first generate those ideas without any grants or anything.
Yeah.
A lot of the more interesting, I'm not to say successful, educational games, particularly when it comes to health, they're very experiential. There are some games that are designed to promote empathy. For example, there was one game that I came across. It was designed to understand what people who are on the autism spectrum deal with. It was for neurotypical people. And the idea was you saw a playground. And the idea is as you got closer to the playground and people playing on it, you got more of a sensory overload. And this game was designed to be played with headphones. So you hear more static and the noise become more garbled. It was designed to simulate a sensory overload. And the idea is that the further away you get from people, then the less that happens. And trying to illustrate this idea that this is what certain people on the autism spectrum deal with. I will say there are some that do it fairly well. A great example of a good educational game I can recommend. Have you all heard of Plague Inc?
Sounds familiar.
Bro, yeah, I have. The board game.
There's also a computer game too.
Oh, okay.
The concept of it was that you took on the role of a microorganism, a virus, a bacteria, or a parasite, and they've expanded it to other things as well. And the idea is that you evolve and develop, and the goal is to eradicate humanity. So it's possible someone on a larger level is playing that with COVID right now. But anyway, the idea is throughout the game is you try to evolve the disease so that it's more resistant to things, and you try to sort of offset public health responses. And what's neat about this game, the company keeps making new iterations of it, and they actually developed one for both COVID and for the 2020 election that was about fake news. And the idea is you created a viral rumor, and the idea was how to make it so that it would spread. And there were things like how you discredit reputable sources and how you get like idiot celebrities to endorse your terrible idea. And I think that's an example of a cool way of using tech to talk about a subject that's important.
Oh, yeah. And that Play game was successful because when the pandemic happened, everybody knew to wear masks. Have any of you guys seen the Netflix movie General Magic?
No,
I haven't.
It's a movie about how a bunch of influential tech people in Silicon Valley tried to invent the smartphone in the 80s, and it failed. I encourage all of you to watch it. It's an unbelievable movie. The takeaway from that movie is that you can have a brilliant product, and what they came out with was really close to what we have today in terms of smartphones in the 80s. But if the public isn't ready for it, it's still the wrong product. Like an innovative product at the wrong time is still the wrong product.
Yeah.
Like, so if you take the things that precipitated people wanting to create video games in the 90s, I want something that is available in a medium that children use that will help them remember the important facets of these things. Should they be called upon to use that knowledge? Like today, you could just create a smartphone app for that, or a website that is easy to use and just has some basic decision-making features in it. Like for a kid having an app on their phone, they have diabetes. I'm feeling shaky right now. And then it's like, you press that button and what do you do? If I'm a child with diabetes and I don't understand how it works, that might actually be helpful. So even though the impetus is there for these games, like they meant well, an innovative product at the wrong time is still the wrong product. So the same people trying to do the same thing today might come up with something that's more effective and more useful and is so useful that it's kind of like incidental. It's like, yeah, of course these apps exist. Of course there's an app that will help children understand what to do with diabetes. So in some ways you could say they're ahead of their time. That having been said, that asthma game is still just objectively bad.
All right. I think that's a good note to end on.
Thanks, Pass Me, and thank you for listening. If this was your first episode, I hope you'll check out the rest of our catalog. Over the past year, we've covered a variety of game controversies, including the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas Hot Coffee mod, Night Trap, Custer's Revenge, and the infamous Mr. Jack Thompson. If you listened to us from the very beginning or picked us up somewhere in the middle, thanks for giving us some of your time. Either way, I hope you'll keep listening because we have some exciting episodes coming up that I hope you'll enjoy. In the meantime, that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating on iTunes. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Sequi by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and speaking for John Dukes, Elford Stephens, and Phil Thomas, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal.
Does anybody have front-facing lighting? Like, do you have lighting you can put like in front of you, John, Alfred?
No.
I can't stop this, man. This is what you get.
I have the setting sun behind me.
Okay. Well, this is a pilot, so I mean, maybe we can figure out lighting for the real episodes, right?
Do we need lighting for a podcast? Though?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
We don't need live for a podcast. That's great. Let's just go with the flow.
Makeup artist, too.
Yeah, we don't makeup artists. This is real, man. This is real. 100%.
Okay.
Get raw up in here.
I want everybody to go like this. Go like this. John, Kev, Alfred, go like this. See? Do that. John, this. Okay, you see this? That's the money maker. All right? It needs to be well lit.
I know some of us have faces for radio over here.
Oh.